Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into a world of breath that turns instantly to mist of snow that creaks beneath every careful footstep of stars so sharp and bright they seem almost cold themselves. You find yourself standing at the edge of a vast winter plain, wrapped in unfamiliar hides, watching the last weak glow of autumn fade into something far more serious. The wind carries the faint scent of wood smoke and distant animal tracks. Somewhere in the darkness a dog barks once and then falls silent. You probably will not survive this. Not in the way you imagine survival, at least. Endless winter nights have a habit of humbling even the most confident modern traveller who arrives with a light jacket and a very optimistic attitude. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I always love seeing how far these quiet journeys travel. Now dim the lights and let the story carry you gently forward. You stand with a small group of people who have already been preparing for this season for weeks, perhaps months. They move with a calm sense of purpose that feels both reassuring and slightly intimidating. You realize very quickly that winter is not an unexpected visitor here. It is a predictable force, something woven into the rhythm of life like sunrise and sunset. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that many Native American tribes planned their entire yearly cycle around seasonal shifts, gathering food, repairing shelters, and storing fuel long before the first real frost appeared. Preparation is not dramatic, it is patient. The air tonight feels different from the cool evenings of early autumn. It bites softly at your cheeks and creeps beneath the edges of your borrowed clothing. You pull the fur tighter around your shoulders and notice how the others adjust their garments with small practiced movements. No one rushes, no one complains, there is only quiet awareness. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in oral traditions suggests that certain communities could judge the severity of the coming winter by observing the thickness of animal pelts during the late fall. It sounds almost like folklore at first. Still you watch as one hunter examines a freshly taken deer hide with thoughtful attention, as if reading a secret message written in fur and fat. Historians still argue whether such predictive methods were consistently accurate or whether they formed part of a broader cultural understanding of nature that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Either way, the knowledge itself has weight here. You feel it in the silence between conversations, in the careful stacking of firewood. In this way, children are guided closer to the shelter entrance as the sky darkens. The shelter itself rises from the frozen ground with an elegance that surprises you. You expected something crude, perhaps, something temporary. Instead, you find structure and intention. The walls are layered with earth and brush shaped to resist the wind that sweeps endlessly across the plains. A narrow opening faces away from the strongest gusts. Even before stepping inside, you sense the difference. It is like approaching a pocket of stillness in a restless world. You duck through the entrance and feel warmth brush gently against your skin. Not overwhelming warmth. Not the artificial blast of a modern heater that dries your throat and makes you slightly sleepy in the wrong way. This is living warmth. It smells of smoke, animal hide, and simmering food. It hums with quiet conversation and the soft shifting of bodies settling into familiar places. A softly spoken woman gestures for you to sit near the inner wall. You notice that the floor is covered with woven mats and layered skins. Someone hands you a bundle of dried grass to tuck beneath your feet. You hesitate for a moment, then follow their example. The difference is immediate. The cold that had been creeping upward from the ground pauses, as if politely reconsidering its plans. Many tribes understood the simple but powerful truth that insulation could matter as much as fire. Archaeological studies of winter dwellings across the North American plains reveal raised sleeping platforms and thick floor coverings designed to trap precious heat. These details rarely make it into dramatic retellings of frontier life, yet they may have saved countless lives during harsh seasons. Outside, the wind begins to rise. You hear it as a distant sigh that grows steadily louder. It brushes against the shelter walls and sends faint vibrations through the structure. No one reacts with alarm. A young boy stirs the central fire with a stick, sending a brief swirl of sparks upward toward the smoke hole in the roof. You watch the flames dance and feel an unexpected sense of calm. The fire is not large. It does not need to be. A moderate, well-maintained hearth produces steady warmth without wasting precious fuel. A practical observation often repeated in ethnographic records notes that overfeeding a fire during winter could be as dangerous as letting it fade. Too much smoke, too much wood consumed too quickly balances everything. Someone begins to tell a quiet story about a winter long ago when snow fell for days without pause. Their voice is low and rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. You cannot catch every word, yet the meaning seeps through tone and gesture. Survival here is not only about physical endurance, it is about patience, memory, and shared effort. A light-hearted anecdote sometimes found in regional accounts claims that travellers unfamiliar with winter camp routines were occasionally teased for sleeping too close to the fire and waking with singed hair. You instinctively shift your position just a little farther back, deciding that humility might be the safer option tonight. As darkness deepens, the shelter becomes a world unto itself. The flicker of firelight paints moving shadows along the walls. The smell of stew thickens the air. You realize that warmth is not simply a condition of temperature. It is a feeling built from closeness, routine, and trust. Outside, the stars sharpen. Inside, the night settles into a gentle rhythm of breathing and quiet conversation. You pull the fur robe around your shoulders and listen to the wind lose its edge against the sturdy walls. The long season has only just begun, yet already you sense that surviving it will depend less on heroic strength and more on careful knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The fire pops softly. A child sighs in their sleep. Somewhere beyond the shelter, the endless winter plain stretches beneath the silence, and you remain here learning slowly how to belong to the cold. The night deepens, and you begin to understand that warmth is not only created by fire or fur, it is also shaped by attention, by awareness, by a steady conversation with the sky itself. You step outside this shelter just before dawn, when the world feels suspended between breath and silence. Snow lies in thin ripples across the plain. The stars are fading, but still sharp enough to make you squint. Your lungs tighten at the first rush of cold air, and you instinctively pull your borrowed robe closer. Someone nearby chuckles softly at your reaction, not unkindly, simply with the familiarity of someone who's experienced this moment many winters in a row. A commonly accepted historical observation tells us that many native communities relied on close observation of natural signs to anticipate changing weather. Long before instruments or printed forecasts, they studied the movement of clouds, the behavior of animals, and the feel of the wind on exposed skin. This knowledge was not abstract. It was survival in its most practical form. You notice an older man crouching near a patch of untouched snow. He brushes his hand across the surface, lifts the powder to his nose, and breathes in slowly. You wonder what he is sensing. Moisture, perhaps. A shift in temperature. Some subtle clue that your untrained senses would miss entirely. A curious tale recorded by early travellers mentions that certain groups could predict approaching storms by watching how birds flew low across open ground. Whether this was coincidence or refined ecological awareness remains uncertain. Yet you cannot ignore how the people around you glance frequently toward the horizon, as though the sky itself was speaking in a language they have known since childhood. Scholars continue to debate the exact accuracy of traditional weather prediction methods. Some argue that oral knowledge systems incorporated generations of empirical observation. Others suggest that memory and storytelling may have blended fact with symbolism. As you stand here with frost forming along the edge of your eyelashes, the distinction feels less important than the result. These people prepare because they know preparation works. The wind shifts slightly, carrying the faint scent of distant pine. A woman points toward a thin line of grey cloud forming low in the west. Her expression tightens for a moment. Not fear, just calculation. Already you sense the rhythm of decision-making beginning to unfold. Should more fuel be gathered? Should the entrance to the shelter be reinforced? Should the children remain indoors for most of the day? You walk slowly across the snow, careful to follow the path others have already pressed firm. Every step produces a dry crunch that echoes in the stillness. You realize that sound itself becomes a guide in winter. Hard snow sings differently from soft drifts. Ice hidden beneath a thin crust can betray the unwary with a sudden sharp crack. A practical detail often highlighted in ethnographic accounts explains that experienced winter travellers learn to read the texture of snow through both sight and hearing. Powder meant slower progress but safer footing. Glossy surfaces warned of hidden danger. Even the angle of sunlight could reveal subtle shifts in terrain. You pause beside a small cluster of shrubs rising through the white surface. Their branches are coated in frost that glitters faintly in the growing light. One of the hunters kneels and examines the tracks weaving around the base. Rabbit, perhaps, or fox. You watch his fingers trace the impressions with gentle respect as if greeting an old acquaintance. There is a whimsical story passed along in some northern regions about children being taught to taste snowflakes to judge whether a storm would bring heavy accumulation or only light dusting. The idea sounds almost playful, like something shared beside a fire to make young listeners giggle. Still, you catch yourself wondering how many practical lessons are hidden within such moments of humour. The sky brightens slowly, revealing a horizon that seems endless. The cold does not retreat with daylight. Instead, it settles more firmly like a guest who has decided to stay for a very long visit. You feel the chill creeping through your boots and remember the dried grass tucked inside for insulation. Without it, the ground would claim your warmth far more quickly. A widely recognised fact about winter survival across many indigenous cultures is the importance of minimising heat loss from the extremities. Hands, feet, face. These are the places where the body first surrenders comfort to the elements. You watch as people adjust their clothing again and again with quiet precision, ensuring that no gap remains where icy air might slip through. Nearby, two women speak in low tones while pointing toward the cloud line. Their conversation carries a steady confidence. Plans are already forming. Perhaps additional food will be moved closer to the shelter entrance. Perhaps sleeping arrangements will be tightened to conserve shared warmth. Winter does not reward hesitation. Historians still question how far such environmental awareness was formalized into structured teaching. Was it learned through direct instruction or absorbed gradually through daily life? As you stand here feeling both curious and slightly overwhelmed, you suspect the answer may be both. Knowledge in this place is not delivered in lectures, it is lived. The sun finally rises above the distant hills, casting a pale gold sheen across the snow. For a moment, the world looks almost gentle, almost welcoming. You know better now. Beauty here is real, but it does not erase danger. It simply coexists with it. You turn back toward the shelter, following the narrow path that leads to smoke curling quietly into the morning air. The promise of warmth draws you forward. Yet you carry with you a new awareness of the sky overhead and the ground beneath your feet. The long winter night may have ended for now, but another waits just beyond the coming dusk, and already the people around you are preparing for it. By the time you return to the shelter, the faint warmth of morning has already begun to fade, not because the sun has disappeared. It still hangs low and pale in the winter sky, but you're starting to understand that sunlight alone does not promise comfort here. Warmth must be created, protected, carefully worn. Inside, the soft murmur of activity greets you. A woman sits near the fire, her hands moving with quiet concentration as she works a bone needle through a strip of supple hide. Beside her, several bundles of fur lie folded like sleeping animals. You hesitate at the entrance, unsure whether to step closer. She looks up and gives a small nod. An invitation. A widely acknowledged historical understanding tells us that Native American tribes developed highly effective winter clothing long before European observers attempted to describe it. Layers were not chosen randomly. They were built through experience shaped by climate, terrain, and the needs of daily work. As you sit down, you begin to see how each piece carries both function and quiet beauty. She lifts a garment and places it across your lap. The inner side is soft and worn smooth by careful tanning. The outer side is thicker still, carrying the natural texture of the animal's coat. You run your fingers across the surface and feel an immediate sense of reassurance. This is not just clothing, it is shelter that moves with you. There is an old account sometimes mentioned in frontier journals that describes travellers mistaking native winter dress for decorative costume rather than survival equipment. The misunderstanding seems almost absurd now as you watch the methodical stitching unfold. Every seam is tight, every overlap deliberate. A loose edge could invite cold air inside like an unwanted guest. You slip your arms into the garment she offers. It feels heavier than what you're used to, yet strangely balanced. The weight settles across your shoulders and chest in a way that seems to anchor you. She adjusts the neckline with a firm but gentle tug, then secures a tie of braided sinew. The fit becomes instantly warmer. A commonly cited fact in anthropological studies explains that fur worn with the hair facing inward could trap body heat more effectively, while outer layers sometimes displayed the hair outward to block wind and shed moisture. You glance around and notice variations in how people dress. Some robes appear thick and shaggy. Others are smoother layered beneath outer coverings of hide or woven fibre. Someone laughs softly as you struggle to fasten a strap near your wrist. A young girl reaches over and shows you the correct motion. Twist, pull, fold. It is a small lesson, yet you feel an unexpected pride when the cuff sits snugged against your skin. No gap remains. No draft sneaks in. A curious tidbit found in certain oral tradition suggests that winter clothing could also signal identity. Specific patterns of stitching or beadwork might indicate family ties or regional affiliation. Even in harsh conditions, people carried pieces of their story on their backs. Warmth did not erase culture, it protected it. You shift closer to the fire, noticing how the layered garments respond to heat. Instead of growing stifling, they seem to breathe. Warm air circulates within the folds held close without becoming trapped. You realize how different this feels from modern synthetic fabrics that promise comfort, yet often leave you sweating one moment and freezing the next. Historians still argue whether all tribes shared similar techniques for winter layering, or whether each group developed entirely distinct methods suited to their environment. As you watch the subtle differences in cut and material around you, it becomes clear that adaptation here is as varied as the landscapes themselves. Outside, the wind begins to rise again, sending a faint whistle through the shelter entrance. You instinctively brace for the chill, yet this time the cold touches you less sharply. The robe holds steady, your arms remain warm, your back feels protected. It is not magic. It is knowledge translated into cloth and hide. A man enters carrying another bundle of pelts. He shakes the snow from them and drapes them across a wooden frame near the fire. The skins must dry slowly to remain supple. Too much heat could make them brittle. Too little would leave them damp and useless. Balance again. Always balance. There's a playful anecdote sometimes shared in northern camps about newcomers layering themselves so heavily that they could barely walk, only to discover that controlled movement generates its own warmth. You smile at the image and flex your fingers inside their new coverings. The stiffness you expected never comes. Instead, you feel supported. Prepared. The day moves quietly forward as people continue their tasks. Sewing, repairing, checking fastenings. You notice how often garments are adjusted, how carefully each person monitors their comfort. Winter here is not fought with bravado. It is negotiated moment by moment. As afternoon light begins its slow retreat, you step outside again. Snow glows faintly under the pale sky. The air feels sharper now, yet your body responds differently. The cold is still present, still real, but it no longer overwhelms you. You're learning to meet it on equal terms. You draw the robe closer and walk along the packed path, listening to the steady rhythm of your own footsteps. Somewhere in the distance, a raven calls out across the frozen plain. Its voice echoes like a reminder that life continues even in the hardest season. When you return to the shelter, the fire is already burning brighter. Evening approaches. Another long night waits patiently beyond the doorway. And this time you feel a little more ready to face it. Even with new layers wrapped securely around you, the frozen ground still finds ways to remind you of its quiet authority. The day fades once more, and you join a small group preparing to move beyond the shelter's immediate warmth. There is a purpose to this outing, something practical, something essential. Your guide gestures toward your feet, then toward a bundle resting near the doorway. You sit down on a low wooden platform while an older woman kneels in front of you. Her hands move with gentle firmness as she loosens the bindings of your boots. You brace yourself for the sting of cold air, but instead feel the surprising hotness out of inner linings brushing against your skin. She lifts one moccasin and turns it slightly so you can see inside. A well-established understanding among historians and ethnographers is that many Native American communities developed winter footwear that was both flexible and remarkably insulating. Moccasins were often crafted from deer or elk hide, carefully smoked and treated to resist moisture. Their design allowed the wearer to move quietly while still maintaining vital warmth. You slide your foot back into place and notice how the sole molds almost instantly to the shape of the ground beneath you. There is a small ritual to preparing for winter travel. The woman hands you a fresh handful of dried grass and motions for you to stuff it gently around your toes. At first, the sensation feels odd, like stepping into a nest. Then the heat begins to build. Natural fibers trap pockets of air that slow the escape of body warmth. It is a simple method, yet it works with quiet brilliance. Some travellers' journals from the 18th century describe astonishment at how indigenous hunters could move across snow for hours without suffering the numbness that plagued European boots of the time. The writers often attributed this endurance to sheer toughness. Watching the careful layering of grass and fur, now you realise that endurance here is built from technique rather than stubbornness. A curious custom occasionally mentioned in regional storytelling suggests that as children were taught to check their own feet at regular intervals during winter journeys, frostbite could creep in silently disguised as harmless tingling. By encouraging self-awareness from a young age, communities help prevent serious injury long before formal medical knowledge entered the picture. You stand and take a few tentative steps. The packed snow beneath your moccasins gives way with a soft crunch. Instead of slipping, your weight spreads evenly across the flexible sole. Movement feels natural, almost graceful. You begin to understand why quiet footwear mattered, not only for warmth but also for hunting. Noise travels differently in winter. One careless step can echo like a shout. Academic discussion continues over whether certain tribes used additional outer coverings such as rawhide overshoes for deep snow travel. Some researchers believe these variations depended heavily on terrain and seasonal conditions. Others point to artistic depictions and preserved artifacts that hint at a wide range of solutions. As you walk alongside your companions, you sense that adaptation here is never static. It evolves with every storm. The wind greets you immediately upon leaving the shelter. It slides across the open plain with a steady persistence that seems almost deliberate. You feel it tug at the edges of your robe and whisper against your ankles, yet your feet remain warm, grounded, protected by knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. A man ahead of you pauses to tighten the binding of his own footwear. The motion is swift and practiced. He glances back to ensure you are managing well. You nod grateful for the silent encouragement. Winter travel is not a solitary test. It is a shared rhythm of observation and adjustment. There is an amusing anecdote recorded in some early trading post accounts about newcomers attempting to run across icy ground in unfamiliar moccasins, only to discover that balance matters more than speed. You take the hint and keep your pace measured. Each step becomes a conversation between your body and the frozen earth. As twilight deepens, the snow begins to glow faintly beneath the rising moon. Shadows stretch long and thin across the landscape. Your breath forms pale clouds that drift behind you like ghostly companions. You realize how much energy your body spends simply maintaining warmth. Walking becomes both travel and survival. A widely recognized principle in winter living among many indigenous cultures was the importance of keeping the blood moving through regular activity. Stillness invites cold to settle deep into the limbs. Gentle, continuous motion keeps life flowing outward to the extremities. You feel this truth in your own muscles as the rhythm of your steps creates a subtle inner heat. Soon the group turns back toward the shelter. Smoke curls upward in a thin silver line promising rest and safety. You are surprised to find yourself reluctant to end the journey. The cold has not vanished yet, it has become something you can negotiate with, something you can meet halfway. When you finally cross the threshold and remove your moccasins, a wave of warmth rises through your body. The dried grass inside is slightly damp now, having absorbed moisture from your skin. It will be replaced before the next outing. Maintenance is constant. Winter allows no shortcuts. You settle near the fire, stretching your legs toward the glow. Outside, the endless night gathers once again. Inside, you carry a new appreciation for the quiet intelligence woven into every step you take across frozen ground. Night settles with a slow and steady confidence, as though the world itself is drawing a thick blanket across the sky. You sit near the shelter entrance, watching the last pale streaks of daylight fade into blue shadow. The wind has grown quieter now, but the cold feels deeper, more settled. It seeps into the spaces between thoughts, reminding you that winter is not a passing inconvenience here. It is a season that reshapes how people live, move, and even breathe. A soft voice calls you inside. There is work to do, preparations that must happen before the true darkness takes hold. As you step through the low opening, the warmth greets you like a living presence. You notice more clearly now the structure that surrounds you. During your first night, you were too distracted by the novelty of survival to truly see it. Now your eyes trace the curves of the walls, the placement of beams, the careful layering of earth and brush. This shelter is not simply built, it is engineered through long experience. Well-established research shows that many Native American groups constructed winter dwellings specifically designed to conserve heat. Earth lodges, for example, were often partially dug into the ground using the insulating properties of soil to shield inhabitants from wind and extreme temperature. You reach out and touch the inner wall. It feels firm and cool, yet not freezing. The thickness acts like a silent guardian holding warmth inside. Near the center of the shelter, a man adjusts a wooden support pole. He checks its stability with practiced movements. Every part of this structure must withstand storms that can last for days. Roof coverings are secured tightly with additional layers of hide and packed vegetation. Even the entrance tunnel is shaped to reduce the force of incoming wind. An unusual custom occasionally mentioned in archaeological interpretations suggests that some winter homes were deliberately oriented towards specific directions, allowing morning light to enter while blocking prevailing winter gusts. Whether this practice was widespread remains uncertain, but as you notice the faint glow of moonlight slipping in from one side, you wonder how many generations refined these choices through patient trial and error. You move deeper into the shelter, careful not to disturb those already settling into their evening routines. The interior space feels communal yet organized. Sleeping areas line the walls, storage bundles hang from rafters where curious animals cannot reach them. A low platform near the fire holds cooking vessels that release gentle waves of steam into the air. Experts continue to explore the extent to which winter housing designs varied across regions. Woodland communities develop different approaches from those living on open plains or in coastal forests. Some used wooden plank houses reinforced with moss. Others relied on snow structures that could be built quickly during travel. Each solution reflects a dialogue with the landscape itself. You kneel beside a woman spreading fresh mats across a sleeping space. She motions for you to help. The woven reeds feel surprisingly warm beneath your fingers. Layer by layer, the bedding takes shape. First the mats, then thick robes of fur, finally a lighter covering that can be adjusted during the night. Comfort here is not indulgence, it is strategy. There is a quietly humorous story sometimes shared in oral histories about visitors underestimating how much preparation goes into creating a proper winter sleeping area. One tale describes a young hunter who boasted he could sleep anywhere only to spend a miserable night on bare ground and emerge at dawn wiser and far less proud. You smile at the image while smoothing a wrinkle from the mat. As evening deepens, the shelter fills with the sounds of daily life winding down. A baby fusses briefly before being wrapped snugly against its mother's chest. Two elders exchange low conversation near the fire, their voices steady and soothing. Someone stirs a pot of stew, releasing the comforting scent of herbs and meat. A widely recognized principle across many indigenous societies was that warmth during winter nights depended on cooperation. Shared spaces reduced the need for excessive fuel. Bodies positioned carefully near one another created pockets of retained heat. Even small gestures such as adjusting a blanket for a sleeping neighbour could mean the difference between rest and restless discomfort. Outside, a faint snowfall begins. You hear the soft patter against the roof covering. The structure absorbs the sound, turning what might have been a harsh reminder into a gentle lullaby. You feel an unexpected gratitude for the people who designed such protection long before your arrival. Scholarly perspectives remain divided on how permanent some winter dwellings were intended to be. In certain regions, families returned to the same sheltered sites year after year. In others, mobility remained essential, and homes were built with the expectation of eventual relocation. As you look around at the carefully arranged interior, you sense both stability and adaptability coexisting in quiet harmony. The fire crackles softly at the center of it all. Its glow reflects on faces growing calm with approaching sleep. You settle into your prepared space, pulling the fur covering close. The cold outside continues its endless vigil, but within these walls you feel shielded. Not entirely safe, never entirely safe, yet supported by knowledge shaped across generations. Snow thickens beyond the doorway. Night deepens. The shelter holds steady against the patient force of winter, and you begin to understand that warmth is as much about where you belong as it is about how you endure. You wake sometime in the middle of the night, unsure at first what has pulled you from sleep. The shelter is dim except for the steady orange glow of embers at its center. For a moment you lie still, listening. The wind has returned. It hums against the outer walls in a low, restless tone that seems to circle the dwelling like an unseen animal. Then you notice the fire. It is smaller than before, not dying but quieter, calmer. A young man crouches beside it, feeding in thin sticks with careful timing. You watch how he studies the flames, almost as though reading a story written in sparks and smoke. The warmth shifts subtly as he works, spreading in gentle waves across the shelter floor. Well-established accounts from both oral traditions and early ethnographic records indicate that indoor fires were managed with remarkable precision during winter months. Fuel was limited. Smoke could become dangerous if allowed to build up. A hearth had to provide enough heat to sustain life without overwhelming the enclosed space. As you sit up and pull your robe around your shoulders, you realize this balancing act continues even while others sleep. The young man glances toward the smoke hole above, a faint ribbon of grey curls upward disappearing into the darkness. He adjusts one of the roof flaps slightly, allowing a cleaner draft to form. The change is almost immediate. The air grows clearer. The flames respond with a soft, steady flicker. Some lesser-known stories describe how children were taught the basics of fire tending at an early age, not through formal lessons, but through observation and small responsibilities, carrying kindling, watching how sparks behave, learning the difference between a healthy glow and a smothered blaze. In this way, survival skills became part of daily rhythm rather than special instruction. You inch closer to the hearth, extending your hands toward its warmth. The heat feels alive against your palms, then seeps slowly into your fingers. Outside, the wind gusts harder, sending a faint tremor through the shelter frame. Inside, the fire holds its ground like a quiet guardian. Researchers who study winter habitation continue to explore how different communities position their hearths to distribute warmth effectively. Some shelters featured central fires that allowed heat to radiate evenly. Others used side hearths to create varied temperature zones within a single dwelling. As you shift slightly to find the most comfortable spot, you sense that such choices were guided by both necessity and tradition. A gentle voice behind you breaks the silence. An older woman has awakened and joins the fire tender. She adds a thicker log to the glowing coals, then settles onto her heels with a satisfied nod. For a moment they sit together without speaking, simply watching the dance of light and shadow. You realize that tending the hearth is not only a task, it is also a form of quiet companionship. There is a lightly amusing anecdote preserved in a few historical journals about travellers who underestimated the complexity of maintaining indoor fires during severe cold. One account mentions a guest who piled on wood in hopes of creating extra comfort, only to fill the shelter with choking smoke. The lesson was learned quickly, and perhaps a little dramatically. The woman gestures for you to help gather a small bundle of kindling stacked near the wall. You move carefully, aware that others are still resting. Each stick feels dry and light in your hands. When you place them beside the hearth, she shows you how to angle them so air can flow between the pieces. Flames thrive on space as much as fuel. A broadly recognized principle among many indigenous groups was the understanding that fire was both ally and risk. It warmed, cooked, illuminated, and protected. Yet it could also destroy the shelter and supplies if neglected or mishandled. This dual nature fostered a deep respect that you can almost feel in the way people move around the hearth. Beyond the doorway, snow continues to fall. The sound is barely audible, like a whisper brushing against the roof. You imagine the endless plain slowly disappearing beneath a fresh layer of white. Inside, the fire becomes the center of a small universe. Its glow reflects in tired eyes, in polished cooking vessels, in the soft sheen of worn leather garments. Academic voices remain divided on how ritualized fire tending may have been during long winter nights. Some evidence suggests practical focus alone guided these actions. Other interpretations propose that symbolic meanings were also attached to the hearth as a source of life and continuity. As you watch the flames steady themselves once more, you sense that both ideas might hold truth. Gradually the shelter returns to silence. The young man stretches and takes his place among the sleepers. The older woman remains a moment longer, adding one final piece of wood before lying down. You linger by the fire, reluctant to leave its gentle warmth. Eventually you settle back into your bedding. The robe pulls close around you. Your eyelids grow heavy. Somewhere in the distance, the wind eases its restless song, and at the heart of the shelter, the fire continues to breathe softly through the long winter night. Morning arrives quietly, wrapped in a pale grey stillness that makes the world feel suspended between sleep and waking. You sit near the shelter entrance, watching thin threads of smoke drift upward into the cold air. The snowfall has stopped for now, leaving the plain smooth and unbroken. Yet the calm does not mean rest. Winter demands effort even on its gentlest days. A group prepares to move out, gathering tools and bundles with steady determination. One of them hands you a woven sling meant for carrying fuel. At first you glance around, puzzled. The landscape looks almost empty. No towering forests, no convenient stacks of firewood waiting politely at arm's reach. Then you remember what you have begun to learn. Warmth is not simply found, it must be collected piece by piece. Long accepted historical understanding suggests that many native communities relied on a wide variety of burnable materials depending on regional conditions. In wooded areas, fallen branches and split logs provided the main source of heat. On open plains where trees were scarce, dried grasses brush and even animal dung became essential fuel. Survival here was shaped by adaptability rather than preference. You follow the others across the frozen ground, your breath forming soft clouds that drift away on the faint breeze. The cold feels sharper this morning, almost metallic against your skin. Yet the rhythm of walking keeps your body from stiffening. Movement itself becomes a quiet ally. Soon the group spreads out, scanning the sterile rain with practiced eyes. You watch as a young hunter kneels beside a cluster of brittle stems protruding through the snow. With careful hands, he breaks them free and adds them to his bundle. Another person gathers small twigs hidden beneath a fallen shrub. Nothing is overlooked. Even the smallest fragment can feed the fire for a moment longer. Cultural memory preserved in oral tradition recalls that children were often taught to recognize useful fuel by both sight and touch. Dryness mattered more than size. A single well-chosen branch could burn more effectively than a heavy log soaked with hidden moisture. You test this idea yourself, lifting a piece of wood that feels surprisingly light despite its solid appearance. There is an unusual practice occasionally described in early trading accounts, involving the use of dried bison dung as a steady burning fuel on the treeless plains. The notion may seem strange at first, yet when you see how carefully such material is collected and stored, you realize it represents a practical response to environmental reality. Heat does not concern itself with elegance, only with effectiveness. The group moves slowly, pausing often to check the horizon. Clouds gather in distant layers, hinting at more snow to come. You sense an unspoken urgency. Fuel must be secured before conditions worsen. Each armful added to the sling across your back feels like an investment in the coming night. Interpretation among researchers remains unsettled regarding how extensively certain communities managed woodland resources through controlled burning or selective harvesting. Some scholars believe these methods helped ensure a sustainable supply of winter fuel. Others suggest the evidence varies widely by region. As you look across the open landscape, it becomes clear that knowledge of the land here is never simple or uniform. A faint sound draws your attention, the soft crack of ice shifting beneath a hidden stream. One of your companions signals for caution, guiding you along a safer path. Even the act of gathering firewood carries risks during the coldest months. Frozen terrain can deceive the unwary with sudden weakness beneath its surface. There is a lightly humorous tale sometimes told about an impatient traveller who ignored advice and attempted to drag an enormous fallen branch back to camp, only to discover halfway through that smaller loads carried more efficiently. You glance at your own modest bundle and feel quietly reassured. Pride has little place in winter survival. As midday light brightens briefly overhead, the group begins its return journey. Your shoulders ache slightly from the weight of collected fuel, yet the discomfort feels purposeful. Each step brings you closer to the promise of warmth waiting inside the shelter. Smoke becomes visible long before you reach the entrance, curling upward like a beacon. Once inside, the gathered materials are sorted and stacked with care. Larger pieces near the wall, lighter kindling close to the hearth. Nothing is wasted. Even fragments too small for immediate use are saved for emergencies. You help arrange the bundles, learning through action rather than instruction. Evidence gathered from field observations indicates that maintaining an organized fuel supply could mean the difference between comfort and crisis during extended winter storms. When blizzards sealed families indoors for days, those who had prepared well endured with greater ease. The lesson settles deeply in your mind as you watch the fire grow brighter with the addition of fresh material. Evening approaches once more, bringing with it the familiar hush of falling temperature. You stretch your hands toward the flames and feel gratitude for the quiet labor of the day. Outside, the endless plain waits in frozen patience. Inside, warmth builds, slowly fed by every twig and branch gathered beneath the pale winter sky. And you begin to understand that survival through the longest nights depends as much on foresight as on courage. As the day fades again into deepening blue shadow, you notice a quiet transformation inside the shelter. The steady rhythm of gathering fuel and tending fire gives way to another essential task: preparing a place to sleep that can withstand the cold hours ahead. You stretch your legs near the hearth and watch as several people begin rearranging the interior space with deliberate care. There is no sense of panic, no rushed movements, only calm efficiency shaped by years of repetition. A long-accepted understanding among researchers who study winter living across indigenous cultures is that sleeping above the frozen ground offered a crucial advantage. Raised platforms reduced direct contact with icy surfaces that could drain body heat throughout the night. You see this principle in action as wooden frames are adjusted along the shelter walls. Fresh layers of reeds and hides are spread across them like soft armor against the cold. You are invited to help. The mats feel surprisingly resilient beneath your fingers, woven tightly from dried plant fibers gathered during warmer seasons. You realize how much of winter survival depends on work completed months earlier. The past quietly supports the present. A memory preserved in certain northern oral traditions speaks of elders reminding young people that warmth begins beneath the body, not above it. Blankets alone could not protect someone who lay directly on frozen earth. You kneel to press down a loose corner of matting and feel the faint rise of trapped air underneath. A simple cushion, a vital barrier. Once the platforms are prepared, thick robes of fur are layered across them. Some are worn smooth from years of use. Others still carry the deep scent of smoke from careful tanning. You settle onto one and feel its softness yield gently to your weight. The difference from bare ground is immediate. Comfort becomes more than a luxury. It becomes strategy again. There is an unusual theory sometimes shared in winter camps about travelers who insisted on sleeping close to the fire for extra warmth only to wake overheated and restless. Experienced hosts would gently guide them toward balanced positions where heat could circulate evenly. You smile at the thought while shifting slightly to find your own perfect distance from the glowing coals. Field notes gathered by early observers often mention how bedding arrangements reflected both practicality and social connection. Families slept near one another, forming small circles of shared warmth. Elders were given places that allowed easier access to the fire. Children were tucked securely between protective layers of robe and arm. Every placement carried quiet intention. Outside, the wind begins its familiar whisper along the shelter walls. You hear snow sliding softly across the roof covering. The sound blends with the low murmur of evening conversation. Someone hums a tune that rises and falls like a distant memory. Academic interpretation remains varied on how frequently bedding materials were replaced or refreshed during long winters. Some evidence suggests constant maintenance to ensure dryness and insulation. Other accounts indicate that scarcity sometimes required careful rationing of comfort. As you watch a woman shake frost from a folded hide before laying it down, you sense the truth may lie somewhere in between. A gently amusing recollection recorded in a trader's journal tells of a guest who underestimated how warm communal sleeping arrangements could become. Accustomed to solitary rest, he reportedly woke disoriented by the closeness of others, only to admit later that he had never slept more deeply. You glance around at the growing circle of resting bodies and feel a quiet reassurance settle over you. You stretch out on your prepared platform as darkness gathers fully beyond the entrance. The fire casts flickering light across the ceiling beams. Shadows move like slow-breathing creatures along the walls. Your muscles begin to loosen tension, melting away under the influence of steady heat. Ethnographic evidence suggests that creating layered sleeping systems was not merely about surviving the coldest nights. It also helped conserve valuable fuel by reducing the need for large fires after midnight. The thought lingers as you pull a fur covering across your chest. Every resource here serves multiple purposes. Every choice reflects long experience. Someone nearby adjusts a child's blanket, tucking it gently beneath small shoulders. Another person shifts position to make room for a late arrival returning from outside tasks. These small gestures weave a net of security that holds the shelter together, as firmly as its wooden supports. You listen to the soft chorus of breathing around you. The night feels vast beyond these walls stretching endlessly across snow and frozen river. Yet within this shared space, warmth becomes almost tangible. A quiet companion that settles into your bones. Your eyes grow heavy as the fire dims slightly, its glow reduced to a steady heartbeat of light. You sense the shelter breathing with you, holding back the cold that waits patiently just beyond the threshold. And as sleep finally claims you, you realize that surviving winter nights is not only about endurance, it is about the art of resting well enough to rise and face the cold again. You wake to the gentle sound of something simmering. For a moment you remain wrapped in your robe, unsure whether the warmth you feel belongs to the fire or to the lingering comfort of sleep. Then a rich scent reaches you. Savoury, earthy, full of promise. Hunger stirs quietly inside your chest. Morning has returned, pale and careful, like a visitor unsure of its welcome. The shelter glows with the soft amber light of an early hearth. Several people are already awake, moving with a steady purpose around a pot suspended above the coals. Steam rises in slow twisting ribbons that catch the faint light. You sit up and notice how the cold lingers in the air despite the fire's effort. Winter does not loosen its grip easily. Yet the promise of food offers a different kind of warmth, one that begins deep within the body and spreads outward like a quiet sunrise. A long recognized pattern in indigenous winter living involved the careful preparation of high-energy meals designed to sustain heat production through the night. Meat stews thickened with fat roasted roots, dried corn and preserved berries provided both nourishment and resilience. As you move closer to the hearth, you realize how deeply survival here depends on what is stored and shared. A woman hands you a wooden bowl filled with steaming broth. You cradle it between your palms and feel immediate relief as warmth seeps into your fingers. The first sip surprises you. Rich flavors unfold slowly. The saltiness of cured meat, the subtle sweetness of root vegetables softened by long cooking. It is not merely food, it is fuel for endurance. There is a lesser-known story sometimes recalled in winter camps about hunters returning with precious stores of rendered animal fat which could be added to nearly any dish to increase its sustaining power. The idea might seem excessive to someone accustomed to modern diets. Yet here, calories are not counted for vanity. They are gathered for survival. You notice how everyone eats deliberately without waste. Every scrap of nourishment matters. Even small children are encouraged to finish their portions. Energy lost to the cold must be replaced through thoughtful consumption. Research drawn from archaeological findings suggests that winter food storage practices were highly organized in many native communities. Underground caches lined with bark or stone helped preserve supplies against freezing and scavenging animals. Bundles of dried meat and grain were protected with the same care given to tools and clothing. Preparation began long before snow ever touched the ground. Outside the sky remains a muted grey. Clouds drift slowly across the horizon like silent ships. You sense that another storm may be gathering. The knowledge adds urgency to each swallow of broth. Strength will be needed soon. An unusual recollection recorded by early explorers describes being offered a mixture of crushed nuts and animal grease that provided remarkable stamina during cold journeys. At first, the travellers reportedly found the texture strange. Later, they sought it eagerly. Adaptation often begins with surprise. You finish your meal and feel a gentle heat spreading through your chest and limbs. Your body responds almost immediately. Fingers move more easily, thoughts sharpen, the chill that clung to your bones during the night begins to retreat. Specialists who examine winter survival strategies continue to discuss how dietary choices influence mobility and endurance among different tribes. Some evidence points to regional variation shaped by available resources. Coastal groups relied heavily on fish oils. Plains communities depended more on large game. Woodland diets combined stored crops with seasonal hunting. The diversity reflects a landscape rich in challenge and possibility. You watch as the pot is refilled with snow to melt for fresh water. Nothing here remains idle. Even the act of drinking becomes part of maintaining warmth. Hydration supports circulation. Circulation sustains life in freezing conditions. A soft laugh ripples through the shelter when someone recalls a tale of a young hunter who tried to skip meals in hopes of appearing tough only to grow weak and shivering before sunset. The lesson remains clear. pride offers little protection against winter's demands. You rise and step towards the entrance bowl, still warm in your hands. Outside, the frozen plain stretches beneath a sky heavy with unspoken promise. Smoke curls upward behind you, carrying the scent of nourishment into the cold air. You realize that warmth is not a single solution. It's a chain of actions: shelter, fire, clothing, rest, and now food. Each link strengthens the next. When you return inside, the fire has grown brighter again. New tasks await, new hours to fill before darkness falls once more. And deep within your body, the steady glow of a well-shared meal prepares you to face another endless winter night. The day slips gradually toward evening once again, and you begin to notice how winter changes the meaning of time. Hours no longer feel like separate pieces. Instead, they blend together in a slow, steady flow, shaped by light, warmth, and shared routine. You sit near the fire, watching sparks rise in delicate spirals, wondering how many nights like this have unfolded across these lands long before you arrived. Around you, people prepare for the quiet labor that fills the dark hours. Winter nights are long, too long for idleness. Hands must remain active, minds must remain calm. You are given a small tool carved from smooth bone and shown how to scrape softened hide stretched across a wooden frame. At first, your movements are uncertain, the rhythm feels unfamiliar, yet as you continue, the motion becomes almost soothing. Forward, lift, forward again. The steady repetition draws warmth into your fingers, keeping stiffness at bay. Accounts preserved in historical observation often describe how evening work served both practical and physical purposes in native winter camps. Repairing clothing, shaping tools, and weaving materials helped maintain essential supplies, while also encouraging circulation through gentle movement. You feel this truth settle into your muscles as the quiet task continues. Across the shelter, another group shapes arrow shaft by the firelight. The scent of heated wood mixes with smoke and the faint sweetness of drying herbs. Each person works with careful attention, speaking only when necessary. The atmosphere feels peaceful yet purposeful. Survival here is never separate from routine. There is a softly amusing recollection sometimes shared in regional storytelling about a visitor who mistook nighttime activity for restlessness, not realizing that stillness could invite dangerous cold into the body. Only after joining the work did he discover the comfort of steady motion. You find yourself smiling at the memory as your hands move more confidently across the hide. Children sit close to their elders, learning through observation. A young girl practices threading a sinew cord through tiny holes punched in leather. Her brow furrows in concentration. Nearby, an older man hums a low melody that seems to match the rhythm of his carving knife. The sound creates a gentle background to the flicker of flames. Researchers who examine social patterns in winter habitation have often pointed out that shared evening tasks strengthened community bonds as much as they supported material survival. Cooperation created warmth beyond the reach of fire alone. As you glance around at the circle of focused faces, you sense that connection settling quietly into the space. Outside, darkness deepens until the world beyond the shelter fades entirely from view. Snow begins to fall again, soft at first, then thicker. The roof absorbs the sound like a blanket. Inside, the glow of the hearth becomes the only sun you need. You pause to stretch your hands toward the heat. The scraping tool rests across your knees. Muscles ache faintly, yet the discomfort feels balanced by a growing sense of belonging. You are no longer merely enduring winter. You are learning its rhythms. An old traveller's journal once noted surprise at how laughter could still be heard during the coldest months in indigenous camps. The writer had expected solemn seance. Instead, he encountered quiet humour shared between tasks. A brief joke passes now among the group, shaping arrow shafts followed by a ripple of warm smiles. Even in hardship, lightness finds a way. Some modern scholars continue to explore how much of this nightly labour was structured by tradition and how much arose from simple necessity. Evidence suggests both influences work together, forming patterns that varied by region and season. Watching the calm coordination around you, the distinction feels less important than the result. Work creates warmth. Warmth creates rest. As the hours pass, completed tools are set aside. Repaired garments are folded neatly near sleeping spaces. The steady motion slows. One by one, people begin to settle down. The fire is fed carefully, its glow adjusted for the long stretch until dawn. You place the scraping tool beside the wooden frame and shift closer to your bedding. The shelter feels smaller now, more intimate. A world contained within woven walls and shared effort. Outside, the endless night continues its silent watch across frozen rivers and snow-covered plains. You lie back and pull the fur covering over your shoulders. Your hands remain warm from the evening's labour. Your thoughts drift softly like embers carried upward on rising air. And as sleep approaches, you understand that staying warm through winter is not only about shelter or clothing, it is also about keeping the body gently and engaged. The mind quietly focused and the heart connected to those who share the long night with you. You wake to the faint glow of morning pressing gently through the shelter entrance. The fire has burned low, yet the air still holds a trace of comforting warmth. Around you, the slow stirring of bodies signals the beginning of another day shaped by cold and quiet determination. Winter does not allow long indulgence in sleep. It asks for awareness, for readiness, for care, given not only to oneself, but to everyone who shares this fragile circle of shelter. As you sit up and adjust the robe around your shoulders, you notice a young child being lifted carefully into a seated position near the hearth. An elder woman wraps an additional layer of fur across the small back, tucking the edges with practiced tenderness. The gesture is simple, yet it carries an unmistakable sense of responsibility. Here, warmth is something that must be distributed thoughtfully. Historical descriptions gathered from a range of cultural studies often highlight how winter survival in many native communities depended on collective effort. Those most vulnerable to the cold were given special attention. Elders were positioned where heat could reach them steadily. Children were monitored for signs of discomfort or fatigue. The idea of enduring winter alone was rarely practical and seldom desired. You're handed a cup of warm broth and encouraged to sit closer to the fire. The liquid slides gently down your throat, spreading quiet strength through your body. Across the shelter, two adults adjust a sleeping platform to bring it nearer the central warmth. Their movements are coordinated, silent and efficient. No one needs to issue instructions. Shared understanding guides the task. There is a remembered account in certain oral traditions about winter gatherings where stories were told specifically to soothe anxious children during long nights. The rhythm of familiar voices and comforting tales came another form of protection against fear and cold alike. You imagine how many generations have relied on such reassurance while storms raged beyond the walls. A young boy offers you a folded mat to place beneath your feet. You thank him and notice the seriousness in his expression. Even the smallest members of the group carry responsibilities suited to their strength. In this way, knowledge passes quietly from hand to hand, from season to season. Anthropologists examining winter living patterns have frequently observed that shared sleeping arrangements allowed body heat to circulate more effectively throughout the shelter. Close positioning reduced exposure to drafts and conserved precious fuel. As you glance at the carefully arranged bedding, you sense how deeply this principle is woven into daily routine. Outside, a faint wind brushes against the entrance flap, stirring a whisper of snow into the air. The sky remains pale and distant. It feels as though the world has been muted for the sake of endurance. Inside, however, life continues with steady purpose. Someone begins preparing food. Another checks the stored bundles of dried meat and grain. Each action contributes to the quiet economy of warmth. There is a lightly humorous recollection preserved in early frontier notes about visitors who are surprised by the closeness of winter living, expecting instead a kind of solitary stoicism. They soon discovered that cooperation offered greater comfort than pride. You feel this truth settle into your own experience as an elder, gestures for you to sit nearer, making space beside her. Some contemporary researchers continue to explore how emotional well-being influences physical resilience during harsh seasons. While precise measurements remain elusive, many agree that a sense of belonging may have played a significant role in sustaining morale through prolonged cold. Watching the gentle interactions around you, the idea feels entirely plausible. The child who had been wrapped in extra fur now leans against the elder's side, eyes half closed in contentment. A soft lullaby rises in the background, carried by a voice that seems to have weathered countless winters. The melody blends with the quiet crackle of the hearth. You shift closer to the fire and stretch your hands toward the glow. The warmth touches your skin, then travels inward like a steady pulse. Outside, the frozen plain waits with patient indifference. Inside, the shelter becomes a shared heartbeat of survival. As morning continues to unfold, you begin to understand that winter nights are endured not only through skill or preparation, but through constant attention to one another. Every blanket adjusted, every cup of broth offered, every reassuring word whispered into the dim light helps hold the cold at bay. And in this small world of woven walls and glowing embers, you feel the quiet strength of community warming you from within. Later that same day, after the pale winter sun has drifted across the sky like a distant lantern, you find yourself drawn once again towards the subtle lessons hidden in ordinary actions. The shelter is calm yet not idle. People move with gentle intention, preparing for another long stretch of darkness. Outside, the snow reflects a faint silver glow that makes it difficult to judge the hour. Winter blurs the edges of time, asking only that you remain attentive. Near the entrance, several dogs lie curled together, their breath rising in slow rhythmic puffs. You notice how close they rest to the shelter wall, close enough to share warmth, but far enough to avoid blocking the passage. One of the hunters gestures toward them and smiles slightly. You begin to sense that survival here extends beyond human effort alone. Historical accounts gathered from diverse regions often mention the presence of dogs in winter camps, valued not only for their help in travel and hunting, but also for the comfort of their shared body heat. In extreme cold, practical solutions, sometimes involved sleeping beside trusted animals, allowing warmth to circulate through proximity. The idea might surprise those who imagine winter endurance as purely solitary. You're invited to sit near the doorway while a thick robe is unfolded across your lap. Its scent carries traces of smoke and pine. Another layer is added over your shoulders. Someone positions you between two companions as the evening deepens. At first, the closeness feels unfamiliar. Then the steady transfer of warmth begins to settle into your muscles like a slow tide. There is a lesser-known memory preserved in certain tribal stories about travellers who hesitated to accept shared sleeping arrangements only to discover their reluctance fading after the first night of genuine rest. Cold has a way of dissolving unnecessary boundaries. Comfort becomes a communal language. As darkness gathers fully, the fire is adjusted to a lower, steady glow. Sparks drift upward and vanish into shadow. The shelter feels smaller now, more intimate. A quiet conversation unfolds nearby, punctuated by the occasional soft laugh. You sense that emotional warmth plays its own role in sustaining resilience. Scholars who explore traditional winter practices continue to discuss how physical closeness influences both survival rates and social cohesion. Some suggest that cooperative sleeping patterns reduce the risk of hypothermia. Others emphasize the psychological reassurance created by shared presence during long nights. Listening to the steady breathing around you, you begin to understand how both perspectives intertwine. A curious anecdote, sometimes retold in historical field notes, describes newcomers who underestimated the value of layered bedding combined with body heat. They reportedly spent hours shivering under solitary blankets while nearby families rested comfortably together. Experience soon replaced hesitation. Practical wisdom tends to speak louder than theory. Outside, the wind strengthens, sending fine snow tapping gently against the shelter roof. The sound becomes a soft percussion that lulls your thoughts towards stillness. You pull the robe closer and feel the warmth of your companions through its thick folds. Your own body contributes to the shared comfort, completing the quiet exchange. Researchers examining Arctic and subarctic survival patterns have long noted the importance of conserving internal heat during sleep. While specific customs varied widely across tribes and climates, the underlying principle remained consistent. Energy saved through cooperation could be directed toward the challenges of the following day. As you settle deeper into the layered bedding, the logic becomes unmistakable. One of the dogs shifts position near the entrance, releasing a contented sigh that drifts through the shelter. The simple sound carries a sense of reassurance. Life persists here in many forms, each playing a part in the delicate balance against winter's reach. Your eyelids grow heavy. The glow of the hearth softens to a gentle pulse. Outside, the storm continues its patient work, reshaping the landscape one silent flake at a time. Inside, warmth gathers not only from fire and fur, but from the closeness of shared existence. And as sleep draws you inward once more, you begin to see how survival during endless winter nights depends on trust as much as on skill. Trust in knowledge, trust in community, trust in the quiet strength that flows between living beings when the world beyond the shelter turns cold and vast. By the next morning, the storm has passed, leaving behind a sky so pale and wide that it almost seems unreal. You step outside the shelter and pause, taking in the vast stillness stretching in every direction. Snow lies deep and unbroken, yet the light carries a hint of gentleness that makes the frozen world appear momentarily welcoming. It is time to travel again. Winter does not confine all movement. In many regions, life continues through carefully planned journeys between seasonal camps, hunting grounds, or nearby communities. You join a small group preparing for such a walk, your clothing secured, your moccasins packed firmly with fresh insulating grass. Each person checks their gear with quiet concentration. Nothing is rushed, every step must be intentional. Established evidence from cultural records suggests that Native American tribes adapted their winter strategies according to the local climate and terrain. Those living into northern forests faced different challenges from those on open plains or along coastal waters. Some relied on snowshoes to cross deep drifts. Others travelled along frozen rivers that became natural pathways during the coldest months. The diversity of approaches reflects the vast variety of landscapes across the continent. You follow your companions into the white expanse, feeling the snow yield beneath your weight. The rhythm of walking returns quickly steady and grounding. Breath clouds form and dissolve with each step. The air tastes sharp yet clean, carrying the faint scent of distant pine. An intriguing habit, occasionally mentioned in winter lore, describes travellers pausing at regular intervals to stamp their feet and swing their arms in broad arcs. The movement may seem almost playful, but its purpose is clear. Circulation keeps warmth alive. You imitate the gesture and feel heat rising gently through your limbs. The path curves toward a line of dark trees in the distance. Their branches are heavy with frost, forming delicate patterns against the sky. A hunter ahead of you signals a brief halt. He kneels to examine the snow, tracing faint impressions left by passing animals. Even in winter, life leaves its mark. You watch with growing respect as he reads these signs like a familiar script. Observations preserved by early visitors often noted how skilled winter travellers could navigate vast distances without losing direction. Landmarks such as the shape of hills, the angle of prevailing winds, or the position of certain stars provided guidance when conventional paths disappeared beneath snow. You glance at the horizon and wonder how many journeys have unfolded across this quiet terrain. There is a softly humorous recollection shared in some historical accounts about newcomers attempting to hurry through deep snow, only to tire quickly while experienced companions maintained a patient, unbroken pace. You focus on matching the steady rhythm of those around you, resisting the urge to push ahead. Interpretation among modern historians remains unresolved regarding how far winter mobility influenced trade networks between distant tribes. Some scholars propose that frozen waterways and hardened ground may have made certain routes more accessible than during warmer seasons. Others suggest that severe weather limited travel to essential movement only. As you continue forward, the answer feels less important than the simple fact of endurance. At the edge of the forest, the group pauses to gather small branches sheltered beneath low-hanging boughs. The air here feels slightly less biting, protected from open wind. You help bundle the wood, grateful for the brief respite. Snow clings to your robe, sparkling faintly in the muted light. A memory long remembered in camp tradition tells of elders advising young travellers to listen to the sound of their own footsteps. Crunching snow, slipping ice, or soft powder each reveal different risks. You become aware of these subtle variations, now adjusting your stride accordingly. Soon the return journey begins. The shelter's smoke appears as a thin thread against the sky, guiding you home. Your legs ache slightly, yet the effort warms you from within. Movement and purpose create their own form of comfort. Back inside the fire welcomes you with steady glow. Wet snow is brushed from garments, fresh fuel is added to the hearth. The routine continues, shaped by knowledge carried across generations. As evening approaches, once more you realize that winter travel is not only about reaching destinations, it is about maintaining connection with the land itself. Each careful step across frozen ground affirms a relationship built on respect and adaptation. And as darkness settles softly around the shelter, you carry the quiet confidence that comes from learning how to move within the cold rather than against it. That evening, after the long walk and the quiet return to shelter, you notice a different kind of preparation unfolding. The fire is tended with extra care. Water is heated in smooth stone vessels. A sense of anticipation settles gently over the group, like the stillness before snowfall. You're invited to follow along, though no one explains exactly what will happen. Outside, the air feels sharper than before. The sky has cleared completely, revealing stars that shimmer with an almost icy brilliance. You are guided toward a smaller structure nearby, half hidden by drifted snow and low branches. Its entrance is narrow, its shape rounded and modest. Warm vapour curls faintly from the opening, carrying with it a scent of heated earth and herbs. Long noted by historians and anthropologists alike, many native communities practiced forms of steam bathing or heated cleansing rituals during winter months. These gatherings served practical and spiritual purposes. Warmth reached deep into the body, easing stiffness and encouraging circulation. At the same time, shared ceremony strengthened emotional resilience during seasons of hardship. You duck inside and are immediately enveloped by a gentle wave of heat. Smooth stones glow faintly in the dim light, releasing warmth stored from careful preparation. Water is poured across their surfaces, sending soft clouds of steam swirling upward. The sensation is both surprising and deeply comforting. Muscles that had grown tight from cold and travel begin to loosen. There is an intriguing custom occasionally mentioned in winter narratives about the use of aromatic plants in such spaces. Leaves of cedar or sage might be placed on the stones, filling the air with subtle fragrance. The effect creates a feeling of renewal, as though the harshness of winter can be briefly set aside. You inhale slowly, letting the warmth settle into your lungs. Voices around you remain calm and respectful. Conversation is minimal. The focus rests on quiet presence. Someone hums a low melody that echoes softly against the curved walls. The sound blends with the gentle hiss of steam, forming a rhythm that seems almost timeless. Academic viewpoints continue to differ on how universal these practices were across the many tribes of North America. Some researchers suggest that steam bathing held central importance in certain regions while remaining less common elsewhere. Environmental conditions, cultural beliefs, and available resources all shaped the ways people sought warmth and balance. As you sit in the rising heat, you sense that variation itself is part of the story. There is a lightly amusing recollection preserved in early traveller accounts about guests who underestimated the intensity of the steam and hurried outside gasping for cool air. You smile at the thought while adjusting your position to find a comfortable place near the wall. The warmth feels strong yet nurturing, like sunlight concentrated into a single room. Gradually, tension drains from your body. Fingers unclench, shoulders soften, even your breathing seems to deepen. Winter has demanded much of you these past days. This moment offers gentle restoration. Cultural traditions passed quietly through generations often emphasize the importance of cleansing not only the body but also the spirit. In the depth of winter, when daylight is scarce and challenges constant, such practices may have provided a sense of renewal that sustained communities through the darkest months. You watch as companions pour fresh water onto the stones, releasing another wave of soothing heat. Outside, the cold waits patiently. You can feel its presence beyond the thin walls. Yet inside, the steam creates a small sanctuary. Time slows, thoughts drift like mist. Eventually, the gathering draws to a close. One by one, people step back into the open air, their skin glowing faintly in the starlight. The chill returns quickly, yet it no longer feels as sharp. Warmth lingers beneath the surface, carried inward like a quiet ember. You walk back towards the main shelter, guided by the familiar thread of smoke rising into the night. Snow crunches softly beneath your moccasins. The sky above stretches wide and clear, filled with the distant constellations that seem almost close enough to touch. Inside, the fire burns steadily. Bedding waits in its careful arrangement. You settle down with a sense of calm that surprises you. Winter still surrounds you. The endless nights have not grown shorter, yet you have discovered another way to endure them, through warmth shared in ritual, through moments of stillness that restore strength, through the understanding that survival includes not only labour and preparation but also renewal. And as sleep approaches once more, the memory of rising steam and quiet song follows you into the gentle darkness. The next night arrives with a deeper darkness than you remember before. Clouds have gathered again, heavy and slow dimming, even the faint glow of the stars. Inside the shelter, the fire burns steadily, casting long golden shapes that drift across the curved walls. You settle into your place near the warmth, sensing that this evening will unfold differently. Someone begins to speak. The voice is low and calm, carrying easily through the quiet air. Others shift closer, wrapping robes around their shoulders and drawing children into the circle. You realize that the long winter night is not only endured through physical effort, it is also softened through memory and imagination. Accounts preserved through generations often show that storytelling played a central role in winter survival among many native communities. When outdoor work became limited and darkness stretched endlessly, tales of ancestors, animals, spirits, and past journeys helped pass time while strengthening cultural identity. As you listen, you feel the rhythm of the words settle gently into your thoughts like falling snow. The story speaks of a trickster figure wandering through a frozen landscape, learning lessons about patience and humility. Laughter rises softly at certain moments, warming the shelter in a way the fire alone cannot. You find yourself smiling despite the cold pressing beyond the walls. An intriguing habit sometimes remembered in winter camp traditions involves weaving practical knowledge into these stories. Warnings about thin ice or sudden storms might appear disguised as adventures or playful mischief. In this way, children absorbed survival lessons without the weight of formal instruction. You glance at the youngest listeners and see their eyes shining with quiet fascination. Outside, wind sweeps across the plain with a distant sigh. Snow taps gently against the roof covering. Inside, the circle grows tighter as night deepens. The storyteller's voice rises and falls like a slow heartbeat, guiding everyone toward calm. Historical observers from later centuries often noted surprise at the richness of oral storytelling traditions they encountered during winter visits. Some initially dismissed the tales as simple entertainment. Over time, they began to recognize the layers of meaning embedded within them. You sense those layers now as the narrative unfolds. A lightly humorous recollection preserved in a frontier diary describes a traveler attempting to interrupt a storyteller with questions, only to be gently silenced by the group's collective gaze. Respect for the flow of words was as important as respect for the fire. You sit quietly, letting the cadence carry you along. Academic opinion has never fully agreed on how winter storytelling shaped social structure within different tribes. Some scholars emphasize its role in preserving history and belief. Others focus on its function in maintaining morale during prolonged hardship. As you listen, the distinction fades. The stories do both. They sustain memory and soothe the present. A pause settles over the shelter as the tale reaches its conclusion. The fire crackles softly. A child leans against your arm, already drifting towards sleep. You pull the robe more securely around both of you, feeling the shared warmth deepen. Another voice begins a new story, this one gentler, almost dreamlike. It describes stars guiding travelers across snow-covered hills. It speaks of animals leaving messages in their tracks. The imagery blends with the flickering light until the boundaries between story and reality grow thin. Cultural memory often carries the understanding that winter nights offered time for reflection as much as survival. When fields lay dormant and journeys grew difficult, communities turned inward, strengthening bonds through shared narrative. You feel that inward turning now, like a quiet tide drawing everyone closer together. As the hours pass, voices soften. Words become whispers. The circle loosens as listeners settle into their bedding. The final embers of laughter fade into gentle breathing. Outside, the storm continues its patient work. Inside, the warmth of story lingers like a protective charm. You close your eyes and let the last fragments of narrative drift through your thoughts. Trickster figures, guiding stars, lessons hidden in simple moments. And as sleep claims you once again, you understand that surviving endless winter nights requires not only shelter and fire, but also the light carried within human voices. Morning arrives slowly, as though reluctant to disturb the heavy silence resting over the land. You wake before the others and lie still for a moment listening. The fire has settled into a bed of glowing coals. Outside, the wind has faded to a faint whisper. Snow lies deep against the shelter walls, softening every sound. You rise carefully and step into the pale light beyond the entrance. The air feels sharper than ever, yet also strangely peaceful. Frost clings to the edges of your robe. Your breath forms quiet clouds that drift upward and vanish. In the distance, a stand of dark trees marks the boundary between open plain and sheltered woodland. Today is a day for tending the body as much as the surroundings. Near the shelter, an elder prepares a small bundle of dried plants. The leaves release a subtle fragrance as they are warmed beside the hearth. You are invited to sit while she demonstrates how certain herbal mixtures can be used to soothe aching muscles and chilled skin. The warmth of her hands feels steady and reassuring. Long-preserved knowledge from winter lifeways reveals that many native communities relied on plant-based remedies to ease the strain of cold weather. Infusions made from roots, bark, or leaves were used to promote circulation, relieve stiffness, and support general well-being. These practices were shaped by generations of careful observation rather than written instruction. You sip a cup of lightly bitter tea offered by another member of the group. The flavour is unfamiliar yet comforting. As it settles in your stomach, a gentle heat begins to spread through your chest. The effect is subtle but unmistakable. Some traditions hint at treatments that may seem surprising today. Heated stones wrapped in cloth might be placed near sore joints. Oils derived from animal fat could be rubbed into skin exposed to harsh wind. These methods reflect a practical understanding of how warmth and moisture interact with the body during extreme conditions. A faint smile passes across the elder's face as she adjusts the bundle of herbs. Her movements carry a quiet confidence shaped by experience. You realize that care in winter extends beyond immediate survival. It includes maintaining strength for the long season ahead. Evidence from early field studies suggests that knowledge of medicinal plants varied widely between regions influenced by climate and local ecosystems. Woodland tribes had access to different resources than those living on open plains or coastal shores. Each environment offered its own forms of support. You feel a sense of respect for the complexity hidden within these simple remedies. A softly amusing recollection preserved in camp lore tells of a young hunter who dismissed herbal treatments as unnecessary only to seek them eagerly after a long journey left his muscles aching from cold and fatigue. You find yourself nodding in quiet understanding. Experience tends to deepen appreciation. As midday approaches, the shelter fills with the gentle activity of daily routine. Clothing is aired near the fire to remove lingering dampness. Bedding is shaken free of frost. Tools are checked and repaired. Each action contributes to the steady maintenance of comfort and readiness. Interpretation remains open among present-day researchers regarding how much formal instruction accompanied traditional healing practices. Some suggest that knowledge passed primarily through observation and imitation. Others believe that certain individuals held recognized roles as healers within their communities. Watching the elder guide your hands in preparing a simple infusion, you sense that learning here flows naturally from shared trust. Outside, the sky brightens slightly, revealing faint traces of blue beyond the drifting clouds. Sunlight glints across the snow like scattered glass. The beauty feels fragile yet persistent. You stretch your arms and feel renewed warmth moving through your body. The ache of previous journeys is softened. Energy returns in quiet waves. Winter still surrounds you, vast and unyielding, yet you are discovering ways to meet it with resilience shaped by both skill and care. As evening begins its slow descent, the fire is tended once more. Shadows lengthened across the shelter floor. The scent of herbs lingers in the air, blending with smoke and the comforting aroma of cooking food. You settle near the hearth, wrapped in fur and thoughtful calm. Beyond the doorway, the endless landscape waits beneath gathering stars. And within this small circle of shared knowledge, you feel prepared to face another night of cold with steady confidence. By late afternoon, the sky begins to darken in a way that feels different from the gentle fading you have grown used to. Clouds gather low and heavy, pressing down on the horizon like a slowly closing lid. The air holds a strange stillness that makes every sound seem sharper. You sense that a stronger storm is approaching. Inside the shelter, preparations begin without delay. Bundles of food are moved closer to the central area. Extra fuel is stacked within easy reach of the hearth. Bedding is tightened and adjusted to create smaller pockets of warmth. No one raises their voice. There is only quiet efficiency, guided by experience that stretches far beyond your own. Accounts carried through generations often describe how winter storms could confine families indoors for several days at a time. During such periods, planning became as important as endurance. Supplies gathered in advance made the difference between discomfort and true danger. You watch as a man checks the entrance flap, reinforcing its edges with additional layers of hide. Outside, the first gusts of wind sweep across the plain, lifting fine snow into swirling patterns that blur the distance. You feel the change even from within the shelter. A faint tremor passes through the structure, quickly absorbed by its thick walls. There is a memory sometimes shared in northern camp traditions about elders teaching children to recognize the sound of an approaching blizzard. Not the loud roar many might imagine, but a gradual deepening of silence followed by sudden restless movement in the air. You listen now and begin to understand what they meant. As darkness falls, the storm arrives in earnest. Snow strikes the roof with soft persistence. Wind circles the shelter like an unseen force, testing every seam. The fire is kept steady rather than large, its glow providing constant warmth without exhausting precious fuel. You sit close to the hearth, feeling both protected and aware of the power just beyond reach. Historical observations recorded by later visitors often noted the discipline required during such weather. Movement outside was avoided unless absolutely necessary. Tasks were organized to conserve energy. Even conversation grew quieter, as though matching the inward focus of survival. You notice this change now in the calm expressions around you. A gently humorous recollection found in a trader's journal describes how newcomers sometimes grew restless during long storm confinements, pacing the shelter floor until fatigue forced them to rest. Experienced hosts would simply smile, knowing that patience was the only true remedy. You settle more comfortably into your place, determined to learn that patience yourself. Specialists studying winter habitation patterns continue to explore how communities maintained morale during extended periods of isolation. Some suggest that structured routines helped preserve a sense of normalcy. Others point to the importance of storytelling, music, and shared meals in easing tension. As you watch a woman quietly begin to hum while preparing broth, the theory feels very real. Hours pass. The storm does not relent. Snow piles against the entrance, forming a barrier that must occasionally be cleared from inside to prevent blockage. You help with the task, pushing the powder aside with careful strokes. The cold air that rushes in during these moments bites sharply at your face, yet the quick return to warmth feels almost luxurious. A long-remembered lesson carried in camp lore advises travellers to treat winter storms as teachers rather than enemies. They reveal weaknesses in preparation and reward those who remain calm. You hold this thought close as you return to your place near the fire. Gradually the shelter becomes a world unto itself. The outside landscape disappears into darkness and drifting white. Time stretches and folds. The steady breathing of those around you forms a quiet rhythm that blends with the crackle of burning wood. At last the wind begins to ease. Snowfall softens to a gentle whisper. The tension in your shoulders loosens as the night moves toward its final hours. You realize that endurance has its own kind of warmth, a slow confidence that grows with every challenge faced and overcome. You lie down and pull the fur covering close. The fire glows steadily. Beyond the walls, the storm drifts away across the endless plain, and within this fragile refuge of earth, hide and shared resolve, you feel the calm that follows surviving another long winter night. When morning finally returns after the storm, it does so with a quiet brilliance that almost feels like a reward. Sunlight spreads across the snow in long pale bands, turning the frozen world into something soft and luminous. You step outside and pause, breathing in air that feels cleaner now, washed by wind and drifting flakes. The landscape has changed again. Familiar pictures vanish beneath new drifts. Trees stand half buried in white silence. Yet the people around you show no sign of uncertainty. Winter reshapes the land often. Adaptation must be constant. Today brings a different kind of movement. Not a long journey, but purposeful travel toward a nearby group who share this wide territory. Exchanges continue even in the coldest months. You help prepare small bundles of dried food and carefully folded hides. Each item is tied with neat precision. Nothing is carried without intention. Knowledge, passed through many generations, indicates that winter trade played a quiet but meaningful role in maintaining relationships between neighbouring tribes. Supplies that were abundant in one region could be scarce in another. Salt furs, preserved fish, or crafted tools might change hands along frozen trails. These exchanges strengthened both survival and social ties. You walk alongside your companions across snow that glitters faintly under the returning sun. The air feels calmer after the storm. Footsteps fall in steady rhythm. Conversation remains low and relaxed. There is comfort in shared direction. An interesting recollection occasionally mentioned in historical narratives describes how certain trade routes became easier during winter when rivers froze solid enough to support travel. What appeared as an obstacle in warmer seasons could transform into a pathway under the right conditions. You glance towards a distant line of ice and wonder how many journeys have crossed its silent surface. At the meeting place, greetings unfold with warmth that seems to defy the cold air. Robes are adjusted, hands are clasped. Quiet laughter rises like drifting smoke. You observe the exchange of goods, the careful inspection of each bundle, the respectful attention given to every gesture. Trade here is not only practical, it is also ceremonial. Scholars continue to explore how widespread winter exchange networks were and how far they extended across the continent. Evidence suggests a complex web of relationships shaped by environment, migration patterns, and cultural tradition. Standing among these people now, the connections feel immediate and tangible rather than abstract. A gently humorous story sometimes told in camp circles speaks of a traveller who arrived late to a winter gathering after losing his way in fresh snow only to be welcomed with teasing remarks and an extra share of hot food. Their memory reminds you that community thrives even in the harshest conditions. As the sun reaches its highest point, brief though that height may be, preparations begin for the return journey. New items are added to your group's bundles. A length of cured meat, a small pouch of dried berries, a tool shaped from polished bone. Each gift carries quiet significance. Walking back across the plain, you feel the steady warmth generated by movement and companionship. The storm's aftermath lingers in sculpted drifts and glittering frost, yet the path ahead feels clear. Smoke from your shelter rises in the distance, a familiar signal of refuge. Researchers who examine seasonal lifeways often note that winter interactions helped maintain alliances and shared knowledge between communities. Information about hunting conditions, weather patterns, or distant events could travel along these frozen routes. Survival depended as much on communication as on individual strength. By the time you reach the shelter again, the light has begun to fade. Another evening approaches with its gentle hush. Goods are sorted and stored, the fire is fed. Bedding is shaken free of lingering snow. You sit near the entrance and watch twilight settle across the land. The cold remains a constant presence, yet you no longer see it only as a threat. It is also the force that shapes movement, connection, and exchange. And as the first stars appear in the deepening sky, you understand that even endless winter nights can hold moments of quiet generosity beneath their frozen surface. Evening settles with a slower gentleness now, as though winter itself has grown familiar with your presence. You sit just outside the shelter, wrapped in layers of fur, watching the last light fade across a horizon, softened by drifting snow. The air feels deeply still, not empty, but patient. A vast pause stretching between one breath and the next. Somewhere in the distance, a lone bird crosses the fading sky, its dark shape briefly visible against pale clouds. You follow its path until it disappears. Movement continues in this frozen world even when it seems that everything has stopped. Inside, the fire has already been prepared for another long night. Fresh fuel rests in neat stacks. Bedding lies arranged in careful circles. The quiet order of the shelter reflects knowledge shaped through many seasons. People here have long understood that survival depends on routine as much as on courage. Each evening becomes a familiar ritual of readiness. You step back inside and feel warmth wrap around you like a second skin. Someone passes you a small bowl of hot broth. You cradle it close, letting the steam rise across your face. The scent carries hints of dried herbs and smoked meat. Simple comforts hold extraordinary power during winter. Generations before you discovered that conserving energy after sunset could mean the difference between strength and exhaustion. Movement slows, voices soften, tasks grow smaller and more deliberate. Even the fire seems to respond, settling into a steady glow rather than a restless blaze. There is an old winter memory sometimes retold in camp gatherings about travellers who tried to keep bright flames burning all night in hopes of driving away the cold. By morning their fuel was gone and the true challenge began. The lesson lingers quietly in your thoughts as you watch someone add just a single piece of wood to the coals. Children curl against their parents. Elders shift closer to the centre of warmth. You notice how bodies form gentle patterns around the hearth like petals around a glowing flower. Shared presence becomes another layer of insulation. Old visitors who once journeyed through these lands often remarked on the calm atmosphere inside winter shelters. They expected hardship to create tension or fear. Instead, they found steady cooperation and an almost meditative patience. You feel that same stillness settling over you now. Outside, the stars emerge one by one, sharp and distant. Frost gathers along the edges of the entrance flap. A faint wind stirs, then fades again. The vast night continues its slow turning. Even today, researchers are not completely certain how different tribes balance mobility with seasonal rest during the deepest cold. Some evidence suggests that certain groups remained largely stationary for weeks, Others maintained shorter journeys between nearby camps. The truth seems to rest somewhere between these possibilities shaped by terrain and tradition. A softly amusing recollection sometimes shared in historical writings describes a young traveller who grew restless during a long winter stay and attempted to venture out alone at night. He returned quickly, humbled by the silence and darkness that stretched beyond the reach of firelight. You glance toward the doorway and feel grateful for the protective circle around you. The shelter grows quieter as sleep approaches. Someone hums a low tune that blends with the gentle crackle of burning wood. You stretch out on your bedding and pull the fur covering close. The warmth feels familiar now, like an old friend who has decided to stay. Your thoughts drift toward the many lessons you have gathered across these nights. The careful gathering of fuel, the art of layered clothing, the comfort of shared meals and shared stories. Each memory forms a small ember glowing softly within you. Outside, endless winter continues its silent watch. Inside, breath rises and falls in calm unison. The fire pulses, gently lighting faces already half lost to dreams. And as you surrender to sleep once more, you understand that surviving the longest nights is not a single act of endurance. It is a quiet collection of habits, kindnesses, and knowledge carried forward through time. Another night settles over the winter camp, softer now, as though the season itself has begun to exhale. You sit quietly near the entrance, watching the sky deepen into a vast blue darkness that feels almost gentle compared with earlier storms. Snow glimmers faintly beneath the starlight. The world seems endless and still. Inside the shelter, the fire burns with a steady, reassuring glow. Its warmth feels familiar now, not a luxury, not even a surprise, simply part of the rhythm you have come to trust. You take your place among the others, wrapping the well-worn robe around your shoulders and letting the quiet sounds of evening settle into your awareness. People here have long known that winter is not an enemy to be defeated, but a presence to be understood. Through countless seasons, they have shaped ways of living that transform cold nights into moments of reflection and rest. You sense this understanding in every small gesture. The careful feeding of the hearth, the gentle sharing of food, the quiet arrangement of bedding that turns a simple shelter into a place of belonging. A child nearby asks a soft question about the stars. An elder answers with patient words that drift like smoke through the warm air. Stories continue to weave themselves into the night, offering comfort without urgency. Old travellers who once visited camps like this often remarked on how time seemed to slow during winter evenings. You feel that same stretching of hours now, as though the world itself has chosen to move at a calmer pace. There are still mysteries that surround these long cold months. Even today, scholars and historians do not agree entirely on how different tribes balanced movement and stillness, ritual and practicality, solitude and community. The answers lie scattered across landscapes and memories. Yet here in the glow of the fire, uncertainty feels less important than the quiet strength of tradition. Outside, a faint wind moves across the snow, lifting tiny crystals into the air. They sparkle briefly before settling again. You listen to the sound and realize how much you have changed since the first night. The cold no longer feels like an unfamiliar force. It has become part of the atmosphere you breathe, the silence you understand. You lie down on your bedding and draw the fur covering close. The warmth beneath you rises gently, meeting the warmth around you. Somewhere a dog shifts and sighs. Someone else murmurs in sleep. These small sounds create a soft tapestry of life continuing through darkness. Your thoughts drift back over the journey. The careful crafting of clothing, the gathering of fuel beneath grey skies, the steam rising from heated stones, the laughter carried through stories told by firelight. Each memory glows like a quiet lantern along the path of endless winter nights. A long-remembered lesson from generations before suggests that endurance grows from patience rather than struggle. You feel the truth of this as your breathing slows. Muscles relax. The fire's light dims to a gentle pulse that seems to match the rhythm of your own heartbeat. Outside, the stars wheel slowly across the sky. Snow lies deep across the plains and forests, covering tracks and smoothing the edges of the world. Yet within this small shelter, warmth remains steady. Knowledge remains steady. The bonds between people remain steady. You allow your eyes to close. The sounds of the camp fade into a distant hush. The cold beyond the walls becomes less a threat and more a quiet companion that shares the night without demanding your fear. Now the story itself begins to soften, words slow, images blur into peaceful stillness. You imagine the fire glowing lower its embers like tiny suns fading into darkness. You picture snow drifting gently outside, settling into smooth, untouched shapes. The wind grows quieter still until it becomes nothing more than a distant breath across the land. You feel yourself resting deeply within layers of warmth and calm. Every lesson learned has led you to this moment of quiet understanding. Winter is long, nights are endless, yet comfort can be found in the steady presence of community and the wisdom carried through time in the simple rhythm of breathing beneath a sheltering roof. Let the world grow softer now. Let the fire dim. Let the cold remain outside where it belongs. Your thoughts drift like snowflakes, slow, silent, weightless. And as sleep wraps around you like a final blanket of peace, the winter camp fades into a gentle hush beneath the watching stars. Sweet dreams.